Hello and welcome to the T2 Hubcast with me, James Cooper.
Me, Tracy Roberts.
And me, Elly Colvin.
Welcome, Elly.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
How has it been, T2, so far?
This is officially day 4.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic so far, thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
We've got time to break it yet, James.
Don't worry. We'll be fine. So see you in 3 months. So today's obviously Elly's first podcast. Me and Tracy, how is Tracy Roberts, by the way?
Tracy Roberts is hanging in there. Yeah, she's doing well. All
right, good.
I'm thriving, not surviving. Is that what they say?
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And really today we are going to get into some interesting concepts and some of the things that we talk around in a lot of our workshops as well, Tracy. So we're going to make it relevant to obviously our lovely listeners with their smooth voices, and understanding that there's some things and definitely going to give some takeaways for people as well.
Definitely,
So,
yeah.
what are we talking about then, Tracy?
We're going to talk about challenge, right? But we're going to talk about challenge from a couple of different kind of positions. We're going to talk about, I guess sometimes people refer to challenge as conflict, won't they?
Yeah.
As in challenging a situation or being in conflict or all those types of kind of words that they'll use. But we like to use the word challenge because it can be applied then to feedback, tricky conversations, problems in the workplace. But essentially it's all down to communication within that period, isn't it? And also how it links to psychological safety, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. And just to look at some of the models that we deliver, and it is interesting that we've obviously taken the conflict continuum from the Patrick Lencioni model, 5 dysfunctions of the team. What obviously just give people the sort of the rationale behind the change from conflict to challenge.
I think more so because as we worked with a lot of our lovely partners and the people that we're kind of, I guess, having conversations with about challenging conversations, I think the word challenge sits better in a lot of them circumstances because conflict essentially straight away puts people's, I guess, mindset into a negative place.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to, I guess, get across in all the workshops that we do is that, yes, of course, the word conflict is there for a reason, but really challenge is what we're talking about. We're talking about how difficult is it to express your thoughts or feelings or emotions in certain positions, whether it is feedback, it is a conflicting situation, but sometimes we're talking about it just in terms of how you step into a conversation. So it's not always pure conflict. So although the conflict continuum plays a part in that, the challenge kind of makes it, I guess, universally seen. Does that make sense?
And that comes back round to what you just mentioned on psychological
Yeah,
safety.
definitely.
And then maybe the reasons why people don't step into the challenge.
Yeah.
There's a lot for us to get at then, Tracy.
There is.
And obviously we're going to bring Elly in and just have some conversations, get her thoughts and opinions on what it's like, obviously coming from the external point of view. And again, it is an interesting point to have somebody that's brand new to T2 coming in and bringing their points of view across. So be aware, Elly.
Straight in. We're just going to say, how much do you want to have conflict?
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. But yeah, I think for us, I think it's important to maybe cover off the fact that this stuff comes up in any workshop that we run, right? Because for most people, that element of how do I deal with a tricky member of the team? How do I deliver difficult feedback? How do I feel comfortable in a situation where even I'm not involved, I'm a bit of a bystander, but in that boardroom it gets uncomfortable and I'm not really sure how to respond? How do I take feedback? That's another thing, because where you sit on that continuum sometimes actually affects how you react or respond to people giving you feedback. So what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between these people, right? And think, how do we get essentially to a position where no matter what end of the spectrum you're at, you can find a middle ground? And there's ways and means of doing that, isn't there?
Okay, you talk about middle ground. So do you want to go to 2 extremes first? Okay, so let's go to this sort of ill-intentioned conflict.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're going to go back into the space of the far end of the spectrum, that 10, if you like, on the scale, I guess if we're talking about it from a conflict perspective, what we're talking about there is sometimes I would explain it as people being in threat state. So we talk a lot about threat state and how people are focused on consequences and the things that could go wrong and all the things that are kind of wrong in the space, if you like. And as a consequence of that, you're walking into any conversation or any situation almost looking for a bit of an argument, or there's something going wrong. Yeah. So people who are at the far end are maybe in a position where they're already, even before they even get into that meeting room, preempting some sort of disagreement or conflict or problem. And as a consequence, things like their body language, their non-verbal communication, all those things, it just screams it. So even if you don't say it, people feel it, don't they? And that's probably the furthest extreme. If we strip it back and take that word conflict out and talk about it in terms of a communication continuum, if you like, someone who's more towards that 9 or 10 on that spectrum is to the point, blunt, says it as it is, maybe doesn't soften the language, might step into personal space a bit, be comfortable cutting people up in a conversation or terminal overlap going on, those things. And they maybe don't intend that, but that's how the communication comes across.
Okay. So, and I just wanted to give you a real life story of the feedback. So when I've been in certain environments, and not necessarily at T2, but it has happened twice at T2, where I've received feedback and I'm nowhere near ready to receive it right now. I'm not in that challenge state mindset. I'm very much in threat. Like, you're attacking me, you're attacking my process, you're attacking my team, you're attacking my people.
Yeah.
Done. Not now.
Yes.
In a couple of days, you can do, but not right now. Because it's still, the first cut's always the deepest, and it's a little bit raw for me right now. So understanding that if someone was coming from the opposite side of why I wouldn't necessarily come to you for the feedback is because I'm seeing it and I'm going, you're just going to rip my head off anyway.
Sure, yeah. So I guess that actually brings it onto a nice subject there, is like, you can sometimes, I would argue, particularly if we're talking about challenge, be in a different number for receiving and giving. So what you're explaining there is being maybe a little bit lower down the line. You're more towards the let's smile and wave territory until I'm ready to accept it. But at the top, I would argue that if you were to give feedback, you'd probably be a little bit more further up that challenge continuum, because you're quite a confident speaker. So if you felt strongly about something, you'd maybe be a lot more comfortable delivering it. So that's why we have to have this discussion. And that's why when we're doing a workshop and we're talking about, okay, take conflict and challenge into the equation and give it an average number, rather than saying, you know, I'm always a 10 or I'm always a 6, because sometimes that's not the case. And as we're going to explore, it changes sometimes for different reasons, doesn't it? So where would you say you are, Elly, in terms of challenge?
I think definitely high challenge. I'd be definitely high up there. But like you said, I think and your point's really valid around, you have to be ready to receive, especially with feedback. So, when you meet somebody, you never really know the last hour they've had. You don't really know the last 5 minutes they've had sometimes. So just because you think you know that person in their normal environment or normal situation, or to have a conversation, to say, right, I'm going to go now deliver this feedback to you now, you're not really sure where they're at in their current mind or body state. So I think it's super important to check in with people as to where they're at right now. Whereas, you know, when you got that feedback and you weren't ready to receive it, it just, you go immediately red mist, perhaps.
I'm running straight back at you.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, because sometimes we can, to Elly's point about that, you never know what the last hour was like, as a really valid point, because even if we know someone really well, we can make assumptions sometimes. And yeah, okay, once we've got a good relationship, and we'll talk about that keystone conversation a bit, James, I think, because that might help people get the base. But I think you're right. I think sometimes it's about, are you wise enough to, sometimes people do ask for permission. And I would argue that sometimes that's actually evoking threat, because you go, can I give you some feedback? And James's face goes, no, you can't. But
no.
Go away. But equally, if you're quite aware, you can pick up on vocal image, physical image, and think, yeah, they don't look like they're open to, they normally do actually, but they don't necessarily look a little bit crestfallen today. It's probably not the right time. But equally, sometimes in the moment when you've got to give feedback, that can be tricky then, can't it? Because even if they have had a terrible last hour, you've still got to be aware of the timeliness of that feedback, or else it becomes something that you don't tell that person. And 3 months later,
you bring it out of the bag.
Because remember that one time when we were in that meeting, you said that it really upset me, and I've been thinking about that for 3 months. And for someone like me, that's even worse, because I think, oh, I wish you'd just told me, you know.
And this is, again, if we sort of look at 10-10, for example, on that sort of challenge continuum, and then if we sort of went down towards the lower end, then Tracy, what does that look like for many of the people that might be going, all right, We all know that person that's up at 10:10. But who's the guys down at the bottom around at 1 and 2s?
Well, I guess in terms of conflict, let's go to conflict first, because we're talking about similar things. But in terms of conflict, it's what I would call smile and wave. So if you see Madagascar, yeah,
Madagascar penguin,
smile and wave, boys, smile and wave. It's someone who is very uncomfortable with any of that going on, any sort of conflict, discord. So as a consequence, they'll kind of just, stay calm or look calm on the surface, not necessarily step in and say anything. And sometimes that's because it's their natural makeup as a human. They like the sort of peace and harmony element, but sometimes actually it's fear. So it goes back to psychological safety. They've maybe tried several times to say something, it hasn't worked, so they've gone back to this position of ruinous empathy, where or not saying anything at all, because they'll kind of wait for someone else to do it, or they'll just presume there's no point in saying anything. And then I guess in terms of communication, sometimes it's because you're more introverted, you're more analytical, and you're slower to process things. So actually in the moment when you're listening to things, and you're maybe even because you're tuning in on everyone's verbal and sort of non-verbal cues, you haven't given yourself the time to process it quick enough to jump in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for both reasons, you'd be less likely to step in and offer your opinion. But here's the thing, if someone else spots it, for a lot of people, all it takes is a question and you will.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And okay then, so having that sort of aspect of, we could even maybe plan some of this stuff. We could even have a plan in place to say, if you were going to challenge me, Tracy, to make sure that, and again, back to Elly's point around sort of, have they had a good hour? Have they could just come off the back of these calls? Then let's start to think about the best way of how we can have healthy challenge, if you like. And that really, that psychological safety element, so that trust and freedom. First of all, do I trust what you say and this relationship and whether this works? And do I feel as if I've got the freedom to be able to have that conversation as well? So that's such a complex thing to think about. But if there was a way that we could plan it so that you go, well, actually, Elly, you've just come into T2. I've had that conversation first of all, and there's just something I want to give you a little bit of feedback on. I don't think I've maybe built up that relationship just yet, but if I was going to challenge you, how would I do it?
Yeah. I sometimes think, and I don't think we're there yet, but it'd be really useful if we could have like a little barometer on us, almost like a colour code, like a red, amber, green. So you'd know, okay, she's in green, we're okay, we can approach.
We probably will get there. Probably Apple have just taken that idea now, Elly, so you should have probably kept that to yourself. But you're absolutely right, James, and I think if we were going to try and, I guess, summarise that, safe, vital, repairable, okay? So if you can set that up with the people that you spend time with, you create that space, that psychological safety. Okay. You're vital for each other, so you're each other's barometers. You healthy challenge, critical friend, whatever way you want to look at it. And repairable is the biggest one. How can you get back when things have been tough, or how do you know how to pull each other out of a certain situation? So what you're referring to there is, how do we create that best possible relationship by doing safe, vital, repairable? Well, there is a way to do that, and that is to actually, from the beginning, have a set of questions that you go through together, and you make agreements and you listen to each other. Listening is the most important thing. And as a consequence of that, then using that same thing to kind of loop back in. But there's essentially 5 questions that you can ask at the beginning of a relationship that will help that conflict situation or that challenge situation.
Now I'm interested, Tracy.
Good, I'm glad you said that. Well, I guess it comes back to basics. So one of the biggest things that we sort of understand is interpersonal understanding is massive, isn't it?
Definitely.
And also that reciprocity that you build for someone else. So you build that based on getting to know enough about each other. Just small things like recognizing how good someone is at something compared to you, or their knowledge bank, or whatever it might be. And it just builds that respect, doesn't it? So
can I give a live example? So just for everybody listening, it was really around sort of the consultancy and professional development journey. Now, we do one-to-ones. We have these conversations on a regular basis. I'd obviously like to be a little bit more regular, Tracy. I'm that kind of guy anyway. but understanding
quality time.
Yeah, if there is something that I really have a burning issue around, I know that we've created that environment enough to, when we sit in this very room that we're in here now, and we can have that quite open and frank conversation and say, this is the way that we've structured it. I've structured it because I want this outcome at the end of it. Rather than just going, yeah, I was upset then and I was happy then.
Yeah.
And I don't really know why.
Yes.
It's actually putting those structures in places
and
that relationship to say, you know what, I respect you, Tracy Roberts, for me to sit here and actually plan what I'm going to say to you and the way I'm going to say it.
Sure.
To consider not only how that message comes out of my mouth, but how it lands on your ear as well.
Yeah, so you are, I mean, we have to, your message is only measured at the other person's ear, so you're absolutely right. So part of that discussion that you have in the beginning has got to form like what that's going to look like. So the first thing that I've got down here, and this is from How to Work with Almost Anyone by Michael Bungay Stanley, that we love.
The legend that is. What's your best? And what that question really is to allow that person to talk about their genius. Okay, so when they go, if you get someone to imagine, right, tell me a little bit about the best, what are you good at, what does it look like? And that person essentially is explaining to you all the stuff that they do when they're in a good place. Like, I'm really super organised, love working on this. And even just by listening to the emotional content of what they're saying there, you're picking all the bits out that they really thrive on. And you're thinking, oh yeah, that sounds great. And I love how their face lights up when they're talking about it. So you go, right, that makes sense to me. Now I know what I'm not good at and what you are, but also what I'm hearing is the stuff that gets you excited. So that lets me know that actually I could probably get you involved in things that bring that out in you. The next question is along the lines of, what's your practices and preferences? So how do you like to work? I don't know, do you like email? Do you like phone calls? How would you like to receive feedback? Do you like me to come to you in the moment? Do you like me to give you a bit of breathing space? Do you like it to be verbal? Are you really precious about other people being around, or should we do it in private? And also it's simple things like when not to desk bomb me and when to desk bomb me and all those things. So it's boundaries, isn't it? Yeah.
Then
that comes back to our healthy challenge
charter
as well, doesn't it?
So again, you're establishing that. And then the next two things are the ones that actually really solidify that. He calls it the good date question and the bad date question, which I think is hilarious, okay? What can you learn from successful relationships that you've had previously? So in a work context, you're going, oh, yeah, who are the best people I've ever worked with and why does that work? So then you go in your mind's eye back to that best person or those best people and you're explaining why that was so good. And then you're going, what can you learn from those that were tricky? And you're then explaining the things that frustrated you about someone that you work with. Now, two things happens there. One, that person goes, oh, I do all those good things. That's great. We're going to jive, right? The other person then starts talking about the difficult stuff. And you think, ooh, I can be a bit of a micromanager actually sometimes. And, oh, I can overspeak people. And, well, right, I'm conscious of that now. Okay. And then the last question is, how are we going to get back on track when things get tough? Or when we, when we need to fix things. Nobody really asks people that question. And I think that's around that challenge thing as well, because we kind of make an assumption, we'll be all right. But we've got to be clear, because it might be, when we have a tricky meeting, Trace, and things get a bit heated because we disagree, just give me a night to sleep on it. And the next day, let's talk about it. But we need to agree we're going to talk about it in the morning. Other than that undercurrent going on in a business where you've fallen out with that person, they've annoyed you, they've challenged your integrity, there's all those things going on. And for the next 2 years of your existence with that person, it doesn't feel quite right and it affects everybody around you as well.
And the team, organisation,
absolutely,
everybody in there. So, okay then, I'm coming to you next, Elly. And just to start to think about, okay, what does, if you picked some of the, maybe even some of the people that you've worked with in the past, and that person that you really know, like, for example, me and Tracy, so we've worked together for nearly 2 years now, and understanding that we've built up this trust, rapport, integrity, psychological safety so that we can have those conversations. But what is it for you? When have you seen, or not, don't need names and numbers, but when is it that you've had situations where the conflict has needed to happen, the person's there and you're ready to go and you could rip their head off, but you don't want to. You're going to actually consider how they're going to take this message on board. But what has good been for you in the past?
I think for me, I've got a bit of a rule of sleep on the 72-hour rule, sleeping on it for as long as I can. just to make sure I don't react in the moment. Okay. I think as humans as well, I'm thinking of a time with somebody I used to work with, and we went in the morning. The day before, there was a bit of a tricky situation. The next day, we went in the morning, classic, making a cup of coffee. How you doing? Yeah, good. You? Yeah, good. Okay. And then that was it.
That's
Awkward. That moment at the coffee machine, and we both went different ways. And I sat on it for a bit. I thought, right, we need to approach this because we haven't resolved this. And if like you said, if we just let it go on and on and on, that would have been sat there as unresolved conflict for however long. Yeah. So I went up to him and just said, and just my nature is just to go up to somebody and just front it how it is, in a soft manner, not with too much tone, and just say, I've noticed it felt a little bit off this morning. Do you want to have a quick walk and talk? And maybe go a little bit softer. I did know this person quite well, though. We'd worked together for a few months. I think for me, I find the challenge with brand new relationships. So say, for example, like we've just met. Yeah. So if you wanted to give me a bit of feedback next week, how would we approach that situation? And with people you've just met where you perhaps not established that level and that foundational level of trust, how do you approach that? Because in some ways, giving feedback or having some healthy challenge early on in a relationship can be a really good foundational point of a relationship. So
sets the standards, right?
Yeah, but I guess you kind of don't know that person enough at that point to say, right, I'm not sure how this will be received or how to give it, or and that's why I guess the work at T2 is so important, to understand yourself first.
Sure. And then you've just hit it on the nail on the head there. Like, every time you land feedback or there's something in the equation there, it's okay to check in how that landed for that person.
Yeah.
So, you will pick up on a little bit of physical change or vocal change in some people. So you kind of get an indication. Or you'll go really low. But you're absolutely right. And I guess I can think of a couple of things where I can think I've had to lean in and say something like, sensing a little bit of tension coming from you now. Can you just help me understand what it is that you're disagreeing with? Or can I just check in with you about how I landed that there? Was that a little bit too harsh? Or how would you prefer me to talk to you about this in the future? I think it's okay to check in. I think the problem is, like you say, if you do something and you walk away and you think, I don't think that landed very well, but you don't deal with it, or you don't deal with it, and then it's just this undercurrent and it builds up and builds up. And you either get two things happen with most humans. They'll either go to the barometer bit, the 10. So in future, that person, before you even go into that meeting room, you're annoyed with them and you're looking for issues, or you go smile and wave at the bottom and you don't give anything in that relationship anymore. And both things are not helpful, are they? So
I think if you say that your internal narrative of what you think is going to happen, and that maybe that risk of, I've got to go sit with them again, when actually they were in a really bad mood by something that's got absolutely nothing to do with you. Or it could even come down to just the way that they're built, i.e. cultural element.
Yeah, well, this is interesting because when you said that, we were just laughing at this earlier, weren't we? Because we're going to do a podcast on this one, so we're not going to go into it in too much detail, but we're doing some work on cultural kind of differences, aren't we, and in language and in conflict and stuff. And we were giggling about this Anglo-Dutch translation guide because we thought it made it very clear what we're trying to get at. So what the British say, with all due respect, we do say that, don't we? Yeah. What the British mean, I think you're wrong. And what the Dutch understand, he's listening to me. And then the other one, very interesting. I don't like it. He is impressed.
Oh. And again,
so it's not very clear, is it? But it makes a lot of sense because obviously we can't just consider things as linear as that, as in, conflict's one thing, challenge is another. It's going to land the same way all the time. It isn't. Your last hour, all those things are in the equation. But I think part of that keystone conversation is to revisit it all the time because relationships change just like they do in real life outside of work, and how do we learn about each other outside work? Well, what happens is organically we fall out or something happens, and organically we find a way to repair it, or else people would just split up every other day. We find that we kind of feel each other out a little bit until we figure out each other's style, don't we? And we go, okay, right, so traditionally she doesn't say anything, then I say something, then she says something, and and that's how it works.
Well, we've just done it now.
Yeah.
So me, Scott, and Ellie have just been over to get some lunch, and it's the chit chat that you have as you walk in. First time we've obviously met Ellie, and had a conversation. So it's like, just how are you doing? Oh, where have you been? What have you been doing? How? All right, cool. There's some good little places around here because obviously Ellie's not from Hull, but understanding that there's different elements that you have that conversation, and then that forms the next time that, for example, tomorrow or whatever, and it's like understanding that it doesn't just happen. It's not just it's not a coincidence. It's something that you've got to really work at, like any interpersonal relationship, both personal and professionally. But understanding from a professional point of view is that if there was something that you really wanted to get across and get your message across, it would be about, well, okay, in different areas of this challenge continuum, then where is the best communication for each one? So if I'm up at 10, how would then I potentially combat that or come back at that and maybe land the message the way that I wanted to? Or if I'm down at ill-intentioned conflict, and you know what? Yeah, just don't talk to me. You don't need to look over here. We're absolutely fine. When really, there's grenades going off everywhere in that part of the organisation, or even as part of that team. But they just go, yeah, no problem. We're absolutely fine. So I think around some of the tools that have helped us in the past. Really, and this is where I become a little bit of a bulldozer sometimes. I know I've done it in the past. Okay, is that I've gone in and there's that person that's sat in the corner of the room. They don't want me to talk to them, and I've gone, and what do you think? And they've gone,
do not pass go. Do not collect £100.
No, I need something from you. Give me something. And it's like,
no,
James, you idiot. Why have you done that?
Well, it's about building up that relationship, isn't it? So I guess if you're someone who's, let's just point out what healthy looks like first. Okay. 6 or 7. Right?
Because, got it, everybody. 6 or 7.
6 or 7, okay? And the reason it is, we're not going to go into the radical candor or radical sort of candor framework as a whole today, because we've done a couple of podcasts on that, but it does kind of align, kindness and directness. And I guess even just in terms of challenge, it does line up with that, because the reality is, if you're able to articulate your thoughts and feelings and maybe stress the urgency of something, or be kind is the word, isn't it? Like, I'm telling you the truth, but this is what you need to hear, or this is what I need to say, then ultimately it means that both parties are going to get what they want from it. If you shy away from missing all the bits out and doing the proverbial sandwich down here, a lot of the content's not going to land properly, or not saying anything, nothing changes. And that's the thing, if you don't say nothing, nothing changes. Whereas up here, no, exactly. Whereas up here, then obviously there's the aggression element. And I think I wrote down assertiveness versus aggressiveness, because some people get that wrong. And that's what you're saying there, James, is like your assertiveness can sometimes come across because you are as clear in your communication to other people. It's a little bit scary. I think we used the word intimidating the other day as well. So I think it is about situational awareness, isn't it? But it's more about sensing how you can help someone's numbers come up or someone's numbers come down. So how do we do that? Well, if someone is sat at 1 or 2 and you are someone who notices they're sat at 1 or 2, you don't do the tell me what you think. What you do is you build a rapport with that person. So you might do something like this. I noticed I didn't speak in that meeting there, and I know I could sense the passive aggressiveness. Okay. So you might take a little bit of time after that meeting to go and sit with them and say, hey, listen, I noticed there was a couple of things coming up for you there, but you didn't look like you wanted to say anything. Do you want to have a chat about it? Or it might be something along the lines of, before you go into the meeting, you know that person's going to be affected and you think they're probably going to be internally bubbling about this. So maybe positioning something before you go in and asking if they've got any questions they want you to ask initially. And then once you build that confidence up in that person, then you can start leaning in and getting them to start the conversation, ask a question. But you've got to signal good intent first so that they get comfortable. And then from the top end, well, we've got to think about that, haven't we? Because if we're going to slide back slightly and we're going to help someone understand that some of it's coming across as too direct, it sounds really counterintuitive, this, but we have to indicate that it was too direct. So have you ever been in that situation, James, where someone's made you look silly and you are uncomfortable with it?
Yeah, I'm currently managing that process. just to understand of when, and again, it's not me being precious. It is just one of the things that has, over time, really been a pretty big bugbear. And I think I shared it with you the other day, Elly, going through Elly's print and the psychometric tools that we use and some of the other things that we use in at T2. And it is literally just being made to look bad in front of people.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
even though it's not intentional.
No, it's not intentional.
No.
And it sometimes it might be me just being a little bit precious. But I really don't think it is. I think it's just the way that don't do it like that. Do it in a different way.
So how would you advise someone then? So like, I guess it's a bit easier for us to talk about those that we're trying to tease out a little bit, because the first answer to that is improve their psychological safety by increasing the trust and freedom element that you've got between each other or in the organisation. Because let's talk about it from an organisational perspective just for a second. We can create 10s or 1s.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because if psychological safety is compromised, we'll either get people fly right up to the top and be like angry and needs not being met and no one's listening, or we get people going quiet. I'd rather have the noisy personally, because at least I know what's going on.
Yeah, at least you can hear it.
Yeah.
My thing for me is just go, can I have a minute? Can I have a minute? Just take it out of that big arena, if you like.
Yeah.
Where some people like to have the audience, but when you're giving feedback to me, and I know that I might be resonating with some of the other listeners to the podcast, is just doesn't need to be a big show. If you care that much about giving me that feedback, and you want to challenge me in the way that's effective for both of us, just pull me to the side, have that conversation. It takes a minute, and then I can move on, and then I'll probably send you an email. The worst thing that anybody can do is go, I've got to give you some feedback.
It's the worst thing ever, isn't it?
And I'm looking around going, you're just talking to me, or is there somebody else in this conversation? And I was like, right, okay, that's one way to do it. But understanding that and again, I know it's not personal. I know it's just the way that other people feel is the most effective and most honest way of doing things.
Well, quite often they're the speaker thinkers, aren't they? Rather than the people who take some time to really sit and think about it. And sometimes even that, because flipping it the other way, if you're a thinker speaker, that can give you anxiety and put you back to avoiding that conflict conversation or that challenge. But it works the same way with praise, let's be honest. 10s and 1s. Some people are less likely to say what they feel and just sort of think, oh, that was great, and not say too much. And other people are like, wow, oh my God. And even people can be a little bit off put by that, because I would explain that a 10 in praise as high five feedback, which does not work. That's like, you're amazing and welcome, well done for getting out of bed this morning. And people are like, meh. Okay.
By the way, you're getting paid.
Yeah. One, underappreciated, undervalued. Do they see what I'm doing? All those things. But in the middle, hey, listen, can I give you some personal feedback based on what I've just heard about what you did in this project yesterday? What I loved about what you did was you took this thing and you did this, and as a consequence, this is going to happen, and that is incredible, and only you could have done that. That's a 6 or 7. 10 is like, woo! Like, party poppers going off, bottle of champagne. Yeah, great. I'm numb now. Yeah.
You parked in your parking spot and you walk through the door.
You'd be lucky if you tried to get parked here. But I think that leads into like one of the other things I was going to talk about from the cultural perspective, like the high and low context conversations. Yeah. And I really found this interesting because low context, what it means is good communication is precise, simple and clear. Messages are expressed and understood at face value. Repetition can be appreciated if it helps clarify. So in that, we're being very, forthright in what we're saying. And did you get that? Let me tell you again. And, that's low high context. Good communication is sophisticated, nuanced and layered. Messages are both spoken or read between the lines. We sense what's in the air. Messages are often implied but not plainly expressed. So in terms of if you think about challenge or feedback or anything that kind of falls into that category, depending on what type of environment you're in, and I'm talking culturally at the minute, then again, you could be someone from another background, culture, environment even, and you walk in and people are saying things and it's just hinted at. It's not actually told you directly. And because you're from the opposite kind of context background, it's like, doesn't even make sense to me. What is going on? And are you saying that I'm good or not? Or
Yeah.
why are you withholding on me? Why are you, hinting at things but not getting to it? And I think even that forms part of it, doesn't it? So in this particular book, and we'll put something on the notes about this, as an example, the US is very low context. So they will keep it simple and clear, repetition, assume that there's always someone stupid in the room, so that we have to bring it around to the lowest possible denominator. And then up to the other end, where we're in high context, when we're reading between the lines and there's not as much directness, and it would be seen as downright rude, let's be honest, to give that feedback. We've got countries like Japan, Korea, Russia and Italy that are up towards the top. Now, a lot of those countries are very spread out, but I guess if we've ever experienced working with different nationalities, I think we can understand that also forms part of this challenge continuum, doesn't it? Because what we think is quite normal is really not normal to someone else. And we've worked with so many organizations where this is a bit of a tricky conversation, because we're working multinationally and they say, hey, let's do a challenge workshop. And you're like, okay, well, so we can't just teach them one model, because they're going to all see it slightly differently. So we need to do a little bit of an education piece around what the right tone and wrong tone is for most people, because otherwise it's going to be a bit tricky, isn't it?
Definitely. Just examples where I've done things in other cultures, thinking I was doing the good deed, if you like, or the best thing to do in that situation, and I know it's just gone down like a lead balloon, and and then I do something that I think's normal, and then it's like the worst, or it's just the way that you see things and the way that. Again,
and I do think that's interesting, because some people will see the UK as quite blunt.
Yeah,
I would say, but actually, if you look at the scale that I'm looking at now, we're not in comparison to some other countries, which does make you think, doesn't it? Because we can deal slightly differently with, say, conflict as opposed to feedback, as opposed to, stating mistakes as an example, because telling someone they're wrong in a high context country in some cases is downright rude. And it's basically, something that you wouldn't do, if that makes sense. So I do think that's just another thing to throw into the equation without confusing anyone. It's just good to think about. That's just something else that plays a part in how we see challenge.
Yeah. Okay. So if we was going to sort of tie this sort of podcast up, Tracy, if there was anything that we could give as sort of tools, quick tools, a top sort of 3, 4, 5 things that people can take away from this podcast, and any final sort of comments from you, what would you put into that?
First thing I would say is, wherever possible, try to establish a keystone conversation with someone. So do those 5 questions.
Yep.
And try and establish what good looks like, what bad looks like, how you want to be communicated to, so you can have that how do we meet in the middle conversation. And always revisit it, because as things shift in your career, your worldview sometimes changes, your ability to take feedback changes and give feedback changes. And if you set that up from the beginning, then it's a good check-in point, isn't it? The second thing is to consider keeping those relationships, to go back to the thermometer piece, nice and warm. If you let things go cold or hot, and you're not just keeping that, things bubbling a little bit, then you're more likely to fall out of those good habits of being able to challenge each other appropriately. I think the other thing that I was going to say was around the people you've got around you. So in your kind of personal board of directors that we always refer to at T2, the people that influence your decisions and you go to for advice and stuff, have you got critical friends in there, or are you just bringing people on board your personal journey that go, yeah, great, or on the opposite side of things go, do this and tell you what to do? You need to surround yourself with people who you can be safe, vital, repairable with, so actually it works both ways all the time. And then you're going to get really used to adapting your style and also taking feedback from someone. And I guess for me, the last thing on there would be go out and solicit feedback as often as possible. Because if you go looking for it, you're not sat bricking it, waiting for it. You meet it in the middle straight away, and you build a tolerance. And then the other thing you do is you signal it's okay for others to approach. But what you can say at that point is how you'd like them to approach it. And then the last thing probably is what we were going to get to at the end, which is what if you have the ability to bring your team together to formulate a plan, look at what this looks like on a bigger scale, and think about, it can be as simple as having these conversations as a team, or it can be really in depth and coming to work with people like us at T2, where we can do psychometrics and show you the realities of your communication styles, and apply some frameworks and all those things. And I think maybe a healthy challenge charter stroke conflict charter would be a good thing to bring into play, wouldn't it?
I think to find the sweet spot would probably be...
Yeah, definitely. What does it look like? And here's the thing. It's not just about what good looks like. It's about what bad definitely looks like and what will not be tolerated in the team.
Yeah, your non-negotiables, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So thinking about that, Elly, if there's anything finally from you around conflict, something that you might want to just add on?
Going to say, yeah, you want to fight.
Yeah. Get outside now.
No, I think definitely from this conversation, I've definitely taken away the 5 questions from a professional and personal perspective. I think from my stance, it would be knowing yourself and the person that you're wanting to speak to.
Definitely. And
taking the time, if you're early on in that relationship, taking the time to build those foundations of trust as quickly as you can, and then keeping it always on, as Tracy said, not letting it go cold and then revisiting it when you need to, and you can't have those conversations. So yeah, knowing yourself and how you show up in those moments, and then who is the person that you're trying to approach. And then I guess the final thing would be we're humans, we're always changing and growing, right? So, who you are today in a year's time, you might be showing up as a different kind of version of yourself. So don't assume that the person that you're speaking to, I guess, will show up in a certain way.
Brilliant.
Really good piece of advice there, because there's a lot of shifting and changing in your career, in your experience, isn't there? So your worldview can be changed and rocked from time to time, and it does. And actually, sometimes just that amalgamation of all the feedback you're getting allows you to realise, if you get a 360, that would be a really good example.
With comments.
Yeah, with comments. And you go, wow, I thought I was doing great. And now I've just read that I'm a bit abrasive, or that I don't tell people what I think. That's the sort of stuff that can change your perspective, and you'd like to aim for, as you said, a year's time being completely different. And I'd like to think that a lot of the people I work with are a bit like that. They read something they don't like and they take it and they do something with it. So those people are really going out with intent to make a difference, aren't they? So I love that, because don't assume because you worked with someone before, in years gone by, then you experience this, you're going to get the same thing, or they want the same thing. Check in. Definitely.
Okay, so what we'll do, I think it might be a good plan to get Elly back in a couple of months' time, after she's worked with us for a while, and then go, right, come on then, Elly, you spoke about conflict. What do you think now? Where have you been? And I've seen you at 10 or 3 or 4 times. So what we'll do is, again, we'll obviously kick back in, and we'll put the resources in the comment section and attach it to the podcast. But ladies, it's been an absolute pleasure to get back in the podcast room, and obviously to meet you, Elly. It's been great as well. So welcome to T2.
Thank you very much.
And we will see you for the next T2 Hubcast. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.